Okay, so the recording is going. The first thing I had on the agenda was introductions. I think most of us probably at least familiar with everybody else, but in case not, I'd like to hop around and do introductions. I think the easiest way to do that is for me to start and just start calling on people down the line. My name is Jordan Hoopert. I work for OPDC. Before I came here, I worked for about 7 years for the Public Defender Services of Lane County. And before that, I was about 3 years running a small private practice. Right now, I'm one of the resource councils here at OPDC and charged with doing stuff like this and generally trying to help out folks doing public defense work. Reed, you are next on my screen.
Thanks. My name is Reed Kajikawa. I've been a public defender since 2005. I've worked in Pendleton and Bend. I've been in Morrow County and Union County and all kinds of Eastern Oregon counties. I'm now the clinic director here at the University of Oregon School of Law's Criminal Defense Clinic. I'm the training director at the Public Defender Services of Lane County. So I'm also on a couple of other work groups and on the audit committee for the OPDC. So that's me. It's nice to see everyone here. Should I just call on Carl and have him go next?
Sure, we can do that. You guys can call on the next person.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Carl McPherson, Executive Director, Metropolitan Public Defender. I've been a public defender for 26 years. Started in Washington, D.C. I practiced at PDS in D.C. I was a public defender in the state of Michigan. I was in private practice in the state of Michigan. I was also a conflict attorney for a county in Michigan doing panel work. I built a public defender office in the state of Michigan and then moved back to Oregon and practiced in total in Oregon for 9 years, both in Washington County and Multnomah County. Thank you. And I'll pass it to Joshua.
Hi, my name is Josh Gums. I have been a public defender for 7 years. Some of that was as a private contractor, the primary contractor out here in the Gorge for OPDS, then OPDC now. But last year we became a nonprofit, so we're now fully a public defender. And yeah, I've been doing criminal defense since I was in college when I was working for a public defender investigator. I have to call on someone. Kane Smith. That's the next person on my screen.
Hi, my name is Kane Smith. I work for the Public Defender Services of Lane County. I've worked here as a lawyer for a little over a year now. I started here as a law clerk in 2021. I'm probably the newest attorney in the group, but hoping to bring an interesting perspective. James.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks. Jim Schaefer. I've been an attorney for going on 21 years. I've been practicing in Oregon, doing public defense work for just over 10 years. Previously practiced in the state of Minnesota. And I'm in Eastern Oregon. I'm part of Eagle Cap Defenders. And I practice regularly in Union and Wallowa counties. I've also practiced in other Eastern Oregon counties, Umatilla, Baker, Morrow, and some other counties throughout Oregon, but mostly in Eastern Oregon. I guess the next up is it Eve Costello?
Yes. And I'm sorry if I look strange. I have you guys all up there on that screen, and I think that my camera's down here, but I'm not sure because I don't use this very often. I am Eve Costello. I've been in criminal practice for 26 years. I spent 7 years doing capital defense work. I spent 5 very dark years where I aged about 15 being the district attorney in Klamath County. I'm back now to the dark side because we have cookies and you live longer. And I've been OCDLA president on the OCDLA board for a while. And that's about it. And I guess we call on, is it Leek? Is that how you say your name? I can't see your
Like.
first.
Close enough.
Like?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's
I'm-
good.
Yeah, I'm Kevin Like. I'm the current director of Clackamas Indigent Defense. I've been practicing since '97. I'm licensed in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Nevada, Oregon. I think that's all of them. Spent a lot of years in Nevada working in the public defender's office, and I did some dependency work before that. Left that to do capital work with a small boutique firm. Then had a kid, decided to move to Oregon. Been in Oregon for a while. I spent a little bit of time doing civil work before I came back to my first love, which is public defense work. And like I said, I'm now running CIDC. And I don't know who else was left on this because my screen's not showing everybody. So if Jordan,
I think we
you wanna-
got
who's left?
bounce
I'm
to
the last
Frankie.
one.
Oh, okay.
Frankie Hupie, I use they, them pronouns. I am currently at the public defender for Marion County. Prior to that, I actually spent a couple of years working for OJD. And then before that, I was down in Douglas County at the public defender's office. And at the very start of my career, I was in private practice doing public defense work in a consortium, doing both criminal and dependency. Melissa.
Thanks. I'm Melissa Parker. I have my own private practice and have been part of the Marion County Defense Consortium, I think officially since 2016, but have been doing public defense work even through muni courts before that. And since 2020, mid 2020, I have been doing primarily post-conviction work. So I have exposure to all of your counties. And then am on the board of directors for the Marion County Association of Defenders here in Marion County.
So I think we got Carl and Sean left. Carl, you wanna?
I guess I'm not forgettable, Jordan. I already went. But
Shoot.
I got a
Sorry,
message.
sorry.
Sean.
All right.
So
I guess we got Sean left. So
Sean's having problems with his microphone right now. He was going to cut and paste his bio into
gotcha.
the chat. So if you want to look at that, it looks like he just did.
thanks,
Yeah.
Sean. All right. Well, it's a good thing this isn't being recorded to show that I forgot Carl already went. But I think that covers introductions then. Introduce yourself now or forever hold your peace. Thanks, Sean, for your, we got you in the chat. So the next thing on our agenda is our project outline and timeline. Shannon covered our timeline in the entry thing. We've got basically this month and next, maybe a little bit of January to try to wrap this up,
John,
which isn't.
yeah.
Whoop.
You're getting back there? It's in the main meeting. Let me see. I don't
Sorry, somebody's
know.
talking to me in my ear from something else.
Me.
Maybe not. All right. Anyway, so we've got an
Where-
incredibly tight
where-
timeline on things
Here,
to
all by yourself.
try to turn this around. But I think we can do it. So my proposal to the group, and this is very, very much open for discussion, but my proposal to the group is that we take the current criminal qualification standards breakdown, misdemeanor, lesser felony, major felony, and murder, and work sort of off of that. Except I would also propose that we split major felonies and Measure 11s, split Measure 11s and J law out of major felonies and maybe look at them as their own standards. But using that kind of structure, we have our next meeting to cover misdemeanors and lesser felonies. The next meeting after that to cover majors and Measure 11s. The third meeting to cover murder and anything else that we need to wrap up. And then a fourth meeting to talk about the process of how we kind of move through the qualification levels, and have a kind of higher level process discussion at the end. Frankie?
So I don't remember which study it was. I think it might have been the ABA study, had also suggested breaking misdemeanors into regular and complex, because a Dewey is a completely different bear than a harassment.
Yeah.
Mhm. That is a good point and something we can certainly discuss. Do you think it makes sense to do that process as kind of our meeting schedule and use that breakdown? And we can discuss kind of the interior of what each of those categories would contain.
Yep.
Okay. So I think if we can, we'll use that for our timelines. I'm going to switch the next two things on the agenda because I think it makes sense to talk about this now. For our next meeting, what are people's next week or so looking like? And I'll send out a doodle poll because I know there's at least one person who's not here for this. I think a couple. But if we look to set the next meeting in the next like week or so, what are people's thoughts on that? Anybody have trials coming up that they obviously can't miss or anything like that?
Is the plan to do these over the lunch hour?
The plan is to ask when people are available. Was going to be my next question, so thanks, Kevin. I can do them over the lunch hour. We can also do them after the 5 o'clock hour or late in the afternoon, after people's court day finishes. If we need to, we can look at weekends, or Monday is a holiday. We can look at that. If people want to look at those dates. My time is pretty flexible. I suspect all of your time is less flexible, having, run trial calendars before. So I really want to make it work for you guys. So what times of the day work for all of you?
Noon's pretty good, honestly.
Yeah, noon works.
Courts are not doing anything noon to 1, so I think that tends to fit into my calendar pretty good.
Yeah.
Agreed, generally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
So sometime this afternoon, when I can figure out Doodle, I will send out a poll to all of you with the next week or so worth of dates for the first meeting. Would it be more beneficial to you guys to set all of our next meetings now so it's planned around, or should we set a meeting by meeting because things change? Reed?
I was first going to ask if this is going to be as kind of momentous as I'm hoping it will be. Do people have the ability to start at 11:30?
Maybe.
It just depends on the day for me, but generally I could.
Yeah, probably.
Usually.
Potentially, and in that case, I
can-
would say, yes, can we schedule as many as possible now so we can plan around
That.
them for court and stuff?
Yep.
All right. I've got noon works for most people, 11:30 possibly, full schedule of meetings preferred earlier. Got it. Anything else on the timeline or the time for setting meetings? Great. Takes us to the last item on the agenda, which was the third item on the agenda. Does anybody have any thoughts on what's missing from the current standards? Anything they'd like to take a look at? Frankie, I'm going to add the complex case split out. And we already covered the Measure 11 J-Law split. But anything else?
My general thought is that if Measure 11s and J-laws are pulled out of felonies, then felonies are felonies and major and minor don't matter quite as much. I could definitely be persuaded otherwise, but that's just kind of my gut generally.
Okay.
One
Maybe
thing
I'll
I'd like-
betray my ignorance by asking this question, but is there some sort of component of this work group that is going to be related to developing like actual caseload standards or like workload standards related to these categories, or am I just did I kind of misunderstand?
Good question. Not in this round. That may be something that we take a look at in the future when we get to kind of the individual standards for like what the work needs to look like. But at this round, we're just talking about what an attorney needs to have demonstrated in order to be appointed to a given type of case.
Right. Okay. Sure. Understood.
Yeah.
All right.
One thing that I would like to revisit is the kind of blanket amount of time that people would need to sit at a certain level. I've seen people get escalated before they had the skills because they'd just been practicing for 9 months and suddenly they're able to handle minor felonies and they really shouldn't be. So some more practical milestones in order to step up.
And I think that was one of our hopes also, having more skills-based standards as opposed to time-based standards.
Right.
Because we've seen.
I think
Oh,
building
go ahead, Melissa.
in more co-counsel, either requirements and or opportunities would make a really big difference, I think. The other thing I was going to add, and it may be totally anecdotal, is I recently had a 3L who was a certified law clerk, but because his supervisor for that was not misdemeanor qualified, he couldn't take misdemeanors, and it just became this very clunky thing where I ended up supervising him for OPDS purposes. It's not OPDS anymore, but whatever. And so I think looking at the misdemeanor component for law students and law clerks specifically, there's got to be a better way for that, because the system really prevented him from wanting to do this.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. That was.
I think it's probably a very isolated circumstance, but we definitely don't want that in the future.
No, we definitely don't. I'm sorry that did turn that person off. All right. Major concepts and ideas, food for thought for the next couple of weeks. Anybody else?
I want to chime back in on the co-counsel issue, Jordan, because it's in the current qualifications for minor felonies only, and there should be consistency. Also want to raise, I mean, these are qualifications that are going to be for hourly attorneys, consortia, state trial division, nonprofits, I mean, all providers, yes?
Yep, that's my understanding of it.
I think there has to be accountability for the fact that not all the providers have supervision. So I think you're going to have some standards that are going to be different for an hourly attorney versus one that's in an office. Certainly when they're going up from misdemeanors to felonies or felonies up to majors or to measure 11, just law and murder. Because right now there's no oversight of hourly attorneys in the state. So you need to account for that. And I think things that should be considered are having to submit motions, having to submit FTRs from actual court appearances, trials that have been handled, potentially letters of reference or recommendation that go along with it as well. Some things that should be considered. Since you asked just general ideas, should be considered.
Yeah.
But that's not done now.
Okay. All right. So I have, just to make sure I captured the ideas in my own notes, Carl, it's standards for supervision need to be different for different provider types. We could also say entity types. And having people submit motions, FTRs, letters of reference, etc., should be considered when looking at qualifications. Is that about right?
Yeah, as a general concept, yes.
Yeah. Reed?
I was getting from Carl that the expectations should be the same across all providers, and maybe I'm misinterpreting what Carl said. Not that it would be different for nonprofit providers or or private providers. Like my impression was that the standards should be the same for all, and the supervision standards would be expectations that the agency set for all people. I'm not sure if Carl would want to weigh in on that, but that's how I heard that, and I would that is how I would make that expectation. That's how I would set that expectation. So we should think about that. The other thing that I think I heard Shannon, I think it was Shannon that mentioned that you were talking about the Massachusetts model. One of the things that we're going to have to consider is if we're going to be setting these performance standards, then the agency is going to have to, in the Massachusetts model, the Massachusetts agency bears a responsibility for having and developing a training program that everybody has to like participate in, right, before they're able to take cases. And I forget if it's like 60 hours or 40 hours or something, but Massachusetts developed their own training program that hit all of these performance standards and like educated on them before someone was eligible to take cases. So that, I guess that was a starting point, in addition to the things that Carl was talking about in terms of making sure that's a person was there to supervise co-counsel cases, letters of recommendations, and things like that.
I guess
Carl,
one
do you
of the
want to? Oh, sorry, Josh. Carl, do you want to address the question about what you were?
If understood Reed correctly, of course, I definitely think the expectations should be the same for anyone who's being qualified up and receiving those qualifications. Definitely, expectations should be the same. You just might need to have additional requests of people who are hourly panels because they don't have supervision. So I think there might be additional hurdles for them.
Thanks, Carl. Josh?
I mean, I guess one thing, since they're considering forming or required to form a new panel, basically OPDC managing its own consortium, like what is the process for transitioning attorneys who are currently qualified in firms onto the panel? You know, how does qualification transfer, things like that? I think kind of directly related to what Carl's bringing up, which is like someone who's going from, you know, being qualified under, you know, a firm with supervision and then is going to hang a shingle or something like that to use this new business model, you know, that they're required to develop.
That's a good point. And one of the things that we've been floating around is whether or not everybody is going to need to be requalified. So that is something that we would certainly like the group's input on, maybe as we get a little further into this. All right, anybody else big picture items?
I have one.
Oh,
I have a big picture question, I guess. So we're operating off of the same kind of document base. The things that I'm looking at that we're going to be talking about are the PDSC attorney qualifications. There's a state bar best practices for public defense providers. There's an Oregon State Bar task force from 2014 on performance standards for representation in criminal and juvenile cases, and then there's a maximum caseload standards. Are those documents that we're all familiar with, and are those the documents that we're going to be using to kind of develop these standards, or are there other documentation that you'd like us to consider?
So I think there's a couple other things that we'll want to look at. One of the things that we're still working on is how to do document sharing between the groups. We're looking at how to set up Dropbox. It's apparently a more complicated process in a state agency than I want it to be. But once we get that set up, if we can do it in the next day or so, we can start dropping things for the group to consider in there. The other option is to email everything around. Not my favorite option, but one we might have to look at. So I think we'll be looking at, Reed, what you brought up, plus other state standards that we can pull, plus anything else that anybody can come up with that they think would be interesting for the group to take a look at. So before we hop off big ticket items, I'm going to throw in a couple more that I was thinking about. One that I would like people's input on is, what should we do about arraignments? Right now, there's nothing in the qualification standards about handling arraignments. I have opinions, but I would like feedback from everybody on where to set that standard for an attorney to appear at an arraignment. Do we need Oregon specific experience? We've seen people transferring in from out of state with a lot of experience or not a lot of experience, but some experience from out of state. And is there a point where Oregon specific experience is going to be needed in the qualifications? And then one other thing, I think, while we're talking about skills-based experience, right now our qualification standards are fairly specific to jury trials. Do we want to include bench trials and standards? So those are the three things that I had. Oh, and then where do DA elected reductions fall in? I think it's something else we're going to want to chat about when we talk about misdemeanors and felonies. All right, so I've got notes that I'm going to try to put together and send out. I will hopefully be able to update you guys on the document sharing piece of this afternoon or tomorrow, and I will send that doodle poll out so we can get our next meetings scheduled. Is there anything else that anybody wants for the good of the order?
I think in terms of other things to consider would also be PVs. Just something that's come up recently inside of our office, with, Measure 11 opt-outs that are on a downward departure. Or does the person handling that have to be Measure 11 qualified, or can they be felony qualified because it's no longer Measure 11? Stuff like that.
Got it. Anybody else? Well, I do just want to say thank you again. I know that this is going to be a time-intensive thing, and I want you all to know that I appreciate it and the organization appreciates your help with this. So if anybody has any questions at any point, feel free to respond or reply all to the invite emails or any of the other emails we send. I would appreciate it if you guys reply all to emails to keep everybody in the same loop, so we're not forwarding a bunch of things back and forth to different subgroups. And I look forward to going through this with you.
If you can't set up the SharePoint, do you have like a list of articles that we can maybe try and find on our own before we can get there?
Yes, I do.
Great. That'd be awesome.
And
Thanks.
I will either send out the SharePoint, Dropbox, whatever we use, or send out that list of articles with links or attachments, and people can add to that list as we need. I am in no way assuming that I have found everything that this group will want to look at. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.